I was once locked in a freezing storage shed for 3 days, just because I ate half of a sandwich I wasn't supposed to. It wasn't a prison, it wasn't a reform school, it was our backyard. My dad had built a soundproof room back there, with a deadbolt on the outside and not a single crack of light coming in. I was only 14 at the time, hungry, shivering. My lips cracked from dehydration, my hands trembled from low blood sugar, and when they finally opened the door on the 3rd day, my mom just looked at me, gave a tiny nod and said, "Did you learn your lesson?" No tears, no apology, not even a flicker of compassion. I nodded, because I knew if I didn't, they'd drag me right back in there. And next time, it might not just be 3 days. People ask me all the time, "Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you call the cops?" Let me tell you why. Because I used to think that was normal. In River Hollow, where I grew up, every family had their own traditions. And in the Collins family, our tradition was this: keep the women skinny. Not skinny. You didn't get love. Not obedient. You didn't get freedom. We weren't allowed to call it abuse. My dad called it health care. My mom called it sacrifice for the family's honor. And I believed them. I believed it so much that I taught myself how to lose 5 pounds overnight, just so I wouldn't get locked up again the next morning. I used to stay silent. I used to think it was my fault. I told myself if I just tried harder, things would get better. Until the day I saw my little cousin collapse from hunger. Until the moment I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. I'm not telling this to ask for pity. I'm telling it to break the silence. I'm telling it because this was the beginning of a fight, and I didn't fight it alone. I was born and raised in a place called River Hollow, a tiny town tucked in the mountains of Montana, where folks have known each other since their great-grandparents were kids. In River Hollow, gossip moves faster than Wi-Fi, and anything that happens behind closed doors is labeled family business. Nobody asks, nobody interferes. My family, the Collins family, lived on a ranch that stretched across more than 25 acres. Sounds peaceful, right? Fields of grass, the scent of hay, work horses running in the backyard. But inside that 3-story oak house were things nobody dared to speak of. My father, Richard Collins, ran everything. To him, control was love, and fear was a tool. Every morning, he'd wake up at 4 a.m. to prepare the health check schedule, which was just a dressed-up way of saying, weigh every woman in the house. The numbers were written down in a little black notebook he kept on the dining room table. He called it the health map. But we knew exactly what it was. A blacklist. If your number went up, even just half a pound, you'd be called out at breakfast. No yelling, just a glance, a pointed finger, and then you'd be dragged away from the table, out to the backyard, into the cold wooden shed we called the reflection room. I saw my mother come out of that room with blue lips. My cousin Jessie once curled up shivering under a thin blanket after 2 nights in there. And my sister Claire, she was locked inside for a whole week after gaining weight from taking birth control. No one argued. No one cried. We learned to stay silent. We survived like shadows under the eyes of men. My mom used to be an art teacher, but after marrying my father, she gave up teaching. She became the family nutrition manager. Her main job was to portion every meal, write up 600-calorie daily menus, and pretend not to hear her daughter's stomachs growling. She never stood up to him, but sometimes, when I looked deep into her eyes, I saw she was just as scared as I was. I had a younger brother, Caleb, 2 years younger than me. He never had to step on the scale. He got to eat pizza on weekends, stay up late playing video games. He was Dad's pride and joy, the one who'll carry on the family legacy. Every time I watched him eat until he was full, while I chewed raw lettuce until I felt sick, I'd think, I don't belong here. But then I'd tell myself, none of us were truly free. Some of us just wore lighter chains than others. In the Collins family, women didn't get to exist unless they were beautiful by a man's standard. And beautiful meant skinny, quiet, obedient. I used to think that was just how families worked, that it was normal. Until the day I stepped outside and saw a different kind of life. And I realized, cruelty isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in the things you're forced to accept and never allowed to question. Mornings in my house didn't start with birds chirping or the smell of pancakes like those cozy family shows on TV. They started with the click of the digital scale powering on and the heavy, measured footsteps of my father echoing across the wooden floor at exactly 5:25 a.m. He was always the first one by the scale, eyes like ice. That old black notebook in his hand, ready to record. Inside were hundreds of columns, listing the names of every woman in the house. Me, my mom, my sister, my cousin, and at the top of each page, in bold letters, compliance. We lined up by age. No coats, no socks. They could affect the weight, he said. Stepping on the scale wasn't a health check. It was a trial. And if you were found guilty, meaning you gained even 2 pounds, your sentence was immediate. The reflection room, or, as I secretly called it, the torture chamber without bruises. Inside were 4 freezing walls, a locked door, no heater, no bed. Just an old blanket, a plastic bucket, and silence. No food, no water, no light. You didn't get out until the number on the scale dropped back to the acceptable zone. There was no time limit, only a test of how long you could endure. I was locked in there for 36 hours once, just because I was bloated during my period. My mom spent 3 days inside after antibiotics made her gain a pound, and Jessie, my cousin, once pulled out her own hair to shave off the extra weight. I'm not exaggerating. God, I wish I were. My dad called it loving discipline. My uncle preferred body awareness training, but the family lawyer, who didn't know I was eavesdropping, called it what it really was, fear-based conditioning. We weren't allowed to eat at the same table as the men. Their plates were piled high with BBQ ribs, mashed potatoes, cold beer. We had dry salad, or soup so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl. Dinner was always silent. We learned to chew slowly, swallow softly, and never, ever look up, because our father's eyes were always scanning for weakness. Once I overheard my little brother Caleb joking with a friend that our home was like the military. He didn't know I cried myself to sleep that night, because the military has discharge dates. In my house, there was no way out. I didn't start fighting back with screams. I started with silence, with watching. The winter I turned 15, My school hosted the state-level boys wrestling championship. I worked for the school newspaper, video recording, interviews, articles, so I got to follow the teams up close. And that's when I noticed something strange. The wrestlers could drop 5 to 6 pounds overnight, then gain it all back right after weigh-in, and no one batted an eye. I remember watching this guy named Jake, big, broad shoulders, walking like his limbs weighed a ton under a thick hoodie. His forehead was dripping sweat, and the moment he stepped off the scale, boom. He cracked open an energy drink, tore into a bag of crackers, and grinned like he'd just conquered the world. I asked them how they did it. They laughed and said, "It's just water. You just got to flush it out at the right time." And I learned fast. I started experimenting on myself. Caffeine pills as diuretics, water cycling, 6 hours dry, 2 hours hydrate. Sleeping in heavy clothes, cranking the heater, sweating it all out, then taking a cold shower before weigh-in. Once I dropped nearly 4 pounds in a single night, and for the first time in months, Mr. Collins smiled at me. "That's my obedient girl," he said. I felt sick, but I also realized if I could do it, I could teach others, because I wasn't the only one dying slowly inside this body. And so I started the Thursday Embroidery Club. On paper, we stitched, we knitted scarves, made friendship bracelets, but in reality, we were passing on survival techniques. Dandelion tea as a natural diuretic, mapping out our menstrual cycles to avoid bloating on weigh-in days, heating our bodies with plastic wrap and blow dryers, rehydrating with electrolytes post-weigh-in to stop the dizziness. I drew charts, made hydration schedules, grouped them by body type. We played the game of fake loss, real life. Lose weight on paper so we could earn food. Act fragile so we could catch a breath. But I didn't just teach them how to pretend. I taught them how to record audio using old phones, how to hide a mic inside air vents, how to snap pictures of the scale with timestamps. I taught them how to collect evidence. Because one day we were going to need it. And what I didn't know was that this little club we called the Quiet Thread would become the match that set everything on fire. We thought we were safe. For nearly 3 months, the Quiet Thread ran like a secret machine beneath the surface. We ate enough, drank enough. We grinned quietly every time we stepped off the scale, knowing we had just tricked the system. And the men in the house? They praised the discipline of the women. They even started teaching the younger boys how to train a family using sugar-coated words. We listened in silence. But deep down, we knew. For the first time in a long time, we had taken back a sliver of control. Until that morning, I remember it perfectly. Cold air, snow falling gently outside the window. Jessie, my cousin, leaned in and whispered as she stepped onto the scale. "I had a slice of pizza last night. Still passed." We stifled a laugh. But when it was my turn, something felt off. The scale didn't beep like it always did. And instead of standing beside our usual digital scale, my father placed down a manual one. Old school, no buttons, no screen, no internal chip to tamper with. Just a spinning dial and a fixed mechanical needle. My heart sank, I stepped on. The number was too high. He said nothing, just lashed a thick red line across the page in his book. I stepped down, silent. Jessie stepped up next. She'd gained almost 6 pounds since her last weigh-in, and that's when hell broke loose. Reflection room. Now, he said, ice cold. The entire hallway went dead quiet. Then, one by one, names were called. Claire, Sarah, Lacey. They were dragged off until there weren't enough rooms left to lock us in. They started using the storage closets, the attic, even the basement. Jessie refused to go. She yanked her arm free and shouted, "We didn't gain weight. We ate. We faked the numbers. We cheated to survive." Everyone froze, and just before they could grab her, Jessie reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old phone. "I have videos, photos, recordings. You thought we were weak, but we were preparing." It was like a bomb went off in the room. One of the men lunged for the phone, but Jessie was faster. "I'm live streaming," she screamed. "The police are on their way, today." That night, the entire house went into lockdown. Jessie was dragged away the moment her live stream ended. None of us knew if the footage actually got out. No one dared to ask. My father banned all the women from leaving their rooms. Dinner was cancelled. The Wi-Fi was cut. The TVs were locked with parental codes. Even the curtains were drawn shut. But around midnight, I heard a knock on my door. 3 taps. 1 pause. Then again. I knew it was Caleb. My little brother slipped in, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He had his personal iPad tucked under his hoodie. "I've only got 10 minutes, he whispered, voice trembling. "The back door's open. Dad's in the basement meeting with the uncles." Before I could ask anything, he pulled out the iPad, swiped through a string of folders, and stopped at a file labeled Meeting Basement, 7 p.m. I listened, and in that recording was my father's voice. "If these girls won't fall in line, we'll have to send them off. Colorado or Wyoming. The camps are ready. Doctors, paperwork, all legit. Don't worry." Then another voice. Probably Uncle Frank. But that live stream. Jessie. And my father, cold as ever. Simple. Say she's got an eating disorder. Ship her off to a treatment center. All in the name of health. My stomach turned. They'd been planning this. Long before we ever fought back. Long before we even knew we were victims. I turned to Caleb. He didn't say a word. Just looked at me like he was trying to say, "I know everything." I asked, barely able to speak, "How long?" "Longer than you think," he replied. I knew something wasn't right, but I was scared. I had food, I had freedom, so I stayed quiet. Then why now? Caleb cut me off. "Because today, Jessie screamed, and I didn't. I can't live with that." He handed me a tiny USB drive. "This has copies of every family meeting I've secretly recorded over the past 2 months. Get it out. Don't keep it in the house. They're about to wipe everything." I looked at my brother. He wasn't perfect. He'd stood on the sidelines for too long. But that night, he became the ally I never saw coming. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I spent nearly 3 hours sitting on the floor, back against the door, USB clutched in my hand, heart pounding like a war drum. Every scenario that played out in my head came with a risk. If I acted, I could lose everything. If I stayed silent, we'd keep living like shadows, or worse, be sent away. At exactly 4:47 a.m., I made my decision. I couldn't wait for the system to save us. I had to go find it myself. 7:00 a.m., Sunday. The men in the house left for church like clockwork. Mr. Collins, Uncle Frank, Uncle Aaron. All of them dressed in white shirts and ties, wearing their holy Sunday faces. I told my mom I wasn't feeling well and asked to stay home. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at me for a long time. And right before she turned away, she whispered, "Be careful. I can't protect you, but I won't stop you." I took exactly 8 minutes to change clothes, tuck the USB into my bra lining, check my phone, grab my backup battery, and the mini camera I'd hidden in a drawer months ago. I texted Caleb. Meeting point, like we planned. We met in the backyard of Uncle Frank's house, the same place where the weekly family meetings happened. The same place Jessie had live-streamed her final words before they dragged her away. The house was quiet, locked. But Caleb knew the old security code, stored in the smart home app Dad never bothered to update. We got in. Everything was still there. Dirty dishes, the meeting notebook on the table, and most importantly, Uncle Frank's laptop, still open, no password. I plugged in the USB. The screen lit up with over 50 audio and video files. Every family meeting secretly recorded. Categorizing women, punishments for weight gain, plans to ship us off to behavior correction centers. I didn't hesitate. I opened TikTok, hit go live. No makeup, no filters, no script. Just a 16-year-old girl holding a USB, staring straight into the camera. "Hi, my name is Natalie Collins, and if you're watching this, you might be helping save someone's life." I started talking. I opened files, played recordings, let people hear my father's voice, my uncle's. The words you can't take back. The horror they called family tradition. Viewers started climbing. 20, 100, then 400 watching live. I whispered in my head, "Please save this video. Screen record it. Share it." And just as I played the clip of Jessie screaming in her last live stream, my phone screen lit up with a new message from someone I didn't know. "Reported to Montana State Police. Locating address now. Keep streaming." My breath caught. I only had time for one final line before the sound of tires crunched outside on the gravel. If they silence me after this, at least the truth already spoke. When the first police cruiser turned onto the gravel road leading to Uncle Frank's house, I was still live streaming. I heard the sirens, the tires crunching over stone, a moment of suffocating silence. Then the screen of my phone shook as Caleb pulled me to my feet. "Stop," he whispered. "They're here. We've done enough." I ended the live just as 2 officers stepped onto the front porch. One male, one female. The woman gave me a small nod. "We're with the Gallatin County Sheriff's Department. We received multiple urgent calls reporting unlawful detention and abuse of minors at this address. Are you Natalie Collins?" I nodded, held out the USB and my phone. "The proof is here. Videos, recordings, testimonies, and there's more inside that house. They exchanged glances. The female officer motioned for me to sit in the living room. The male stepped further inside. I saw him pause when his eyes landed on the handwritten punishment chart laid out on the dining table. Within 30 minutes, 3 more patrol cars arrived. Then 2 CPS agents. They separated the women in the house, interviewed us one by one, in squad cars, in the backyard, anywhere private. A female officer named Robin sat beside me, her voice gentle. "You're not alone anymore." By late afternoon, the house was chaos. Cops combed through every room. They found the locked isolation chamber, the plastic bucket used as a toilet, scratch marks on the walls, an air vent pried open with a scrap of paper inside reading, "Thursday, 3 days." But by sunset, the counterattack began. My father arrived. He wasn't flustered. He stepped out of the car in a gray suit and navy blue tie, calm as if he were attending a PTA meeting. Behind him were his attorney and my 2 uncles, Frank and Aaron. They walked straight to the sheriff and handed over a 3-page statement. "We promote a healthy lifestyle, guiding our daughters with controlled diets. No one is forced. There is no cell, only a private reflection space. My daughter has shown recent behavioral instability influenced by social media and radical ideology." I heard every word. My fists clenched so tight, my nails left marks in my palms. That was their strategy, not denial, reframing, turning control into care, turning victims into rebellious girls. By evening, the whole family was ordered to temporarily vacate the house during the investigation. But I knew all it would take was one slip and they'd seize everything back. They had money, they had connections, and now they had a carefully scripted narrative. Worst of all, they'd wiped everything from our cloud storage. The USB I gave was only a fraction. Jesse's phone was gone. The older phones hadn't backed up in time. And I overheard Uncle Frank muttering to the lawyer, "We'll pin it all on them. These little girls thought they were smart. Now they're just a joke." That night, I lay curled on a cot in a spare room of a kind neighbor's house. My chest was tight. I'd gone live. I'd spoken out. But when power and wealth twist the truth, even truth can bend. I texted Caleb. "We need something stronger, bigger, something they can't ignore." He replied less than a minute later. "You still have that USB you kept for yourself, right? It's time." I used to think the live stream was the biggest climax of my life. I was wrong. The truth is, we had only just entered the most dangerous part, the fight to reclaim our voices in a world where power hides behind morality. And to win, I needed something they couldn't deny, couldn't erase, couldn't explain away. Then I remembered. Back when the quiet thread first started, I had hidden an old phone, no GPS, no cloud sync, inside the air vent of the reflection room at Uncle Frank's house. It had been set to record any time someone was locked inside. I never went back to get it, because I was too afraid. But now, I had no choice. The next evening, Caleb and I returned to the house just after sunset. It had been sealed off by police, but only the front door and ground floor had official tape. The back way, through the old shed and side entry, hadn't been checked yet. We climbed through a first-floor window and crept down the creaky stairs into the basement. The reflection room was still there, cold, silent, dust settling in the corners. I went to the vent. My hands trembled as I unscrewed each bolt. I reached inside. Nothing. My chest tightened. No way. I shined my flashlight deeper. Still nothing. Then, just as the panic began to rise, Caleb called from the far wall. "There's another vent here. Looks like it was sealed up recently." I ran over. Together, we pried up a wooden panel. Inside was a small compartment. 2 phones, one with a shattered screen, one still lit up, and a folded packet of papers, Jessie's admission documents, her name printed clearly at the top. Recommended transfer to Behavioral Adjustment Facility, family defiance case, eating disorder, non-compliant. Below it, Uncle Frank's signature, and a red stamp from a private camp in Colorado the police hadn't uncovered yet. We powered on the phone that still worked. More than 20 recordings. Some were just crying, some were the sound of locks clicking, but one clip lasted nearly 8 minutes. My father's voice, clear as day. "I know locking them up is illegal, but tradition can't be rewritten by children. If we have to bend a few rules to preserve family values, then so be it." I looked at Caleb. He said nothing, just picked up the phone, plugged it into the power bank and whispered, "This time, we're not just giving it to the police, we're sending it to the press, to human rights groups, to the whole world." I knew I had just opened a door that couldn't be closed again, but if the price of freedom was standing up to an entire system built on lies, then I was ready. Because this time, we didn't just have evidence, we had living truth, we had our voices, we had a network, growing louder and stronger out there, and I knew we weren't alone anymore. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. There was no dramatic gavel slam, no booming voice from a stern judge like in the movies. Just whispers, pages rustling, and the steady hum of the air conditioner above. But the air itself was heavy. On the left side sat the plaintiffs. Me, my mother. Jessie, who'd been brought back from the behavioral facility, and 6 other girls from our family line, now ready to speak up. Behind us sat human rights advocates, mental health experts, and reporters from Denver, Seattle, even New York. On the right side were the men, my father, Uncle Frank, Uncle Aaron, all dressed in tailored suits, their faces expressionless, as if attending a conference, not standing trial. Next to them sat a high-profile defense attorney, someone who had represented major corporations in civil lawsuits. This wasn't a fair fight, but for the first time, we had a voice. I was the first called to the stand. My hand trembled slightly as I took the oath. But my voice didn't shake. I told them everything. From the first time I was locked up for gaining 0.4 pounds, to the group sessions that were really brainwashing, to the night my father called me a heretic because I dared to eat a sandwich after dinner. I handed over the USB, explained each audio file, presented documentation from the Colorado facility where Jessie had been held without any legal guardianship papers. And I ended my testimony with one line. If the justice system doesn't call this a crime, then justice itself is locked in a dark room, just like we were. Next came Jessie. Her eyes were swollen, but she didn't cry. She spoke in a flat tone like reading the news. They called it treatment, but no child is treated by starving them until they pass out in a bathroom. Then, my mother. She stood, shaking. But for the first time, she stood tall. She spoke of being locked up while pregnant with me, of being forced to track her own daughter's weight, of living every day buried under guilt for not protecting her children. And when she said her final line, the entire courtroom went still. I used to think silence was the safest choice. Now I know silence is complicity. Then came my father. He walked slowly to the stand, voice calm, warm, like a respected patriarch. I only ever wanted what was best for my family. Tradition is the backbone of society. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. His lawyer quoted medical experts, talked about anti-nutrition culture among youth, about freedom being misused in modern parenting. They spun it as a cultural misunderstanding, a parenting difference. But they lacked one thing: recordings. And then the judge requested playback of the 8-minute audio recovered from the hidden phone in the reflection room. The courtroom went silent. My father's voice echoed loud and clear. I know locking them up is illegal, but tradition can't be rewritten by kids. If we have to bend a few rules to preserve family values, then so be it. No more excuses, no more polished charm, just the raw voice of a man who used morality to manipulate and destroy. When the judge wrapped up the day's hearing, she said "We will not call this discipline. We will call it what it is: systematic abuse." I sat there, my shoulders heavy with exhaustion. But for the first time, I didn't feel small. The trial wasn't over. No verdict had been given. But today, the truth was no longer locked in the dark. 2 months after the final hearing, we received the notice. Gallatin County Court will issue its ruling on October 15th at 9:00 a.m. We arrived early. No one said much. Jessie held my hand tight. Mom wore a sky blue dress, the color she used to love before life made her forget. The courtroom that day was more crowded than ever before. Every seat filled. Journalists, activists, even townspeople. Some who once turned their backs on us now sat quietly in the back row, as if they were finally beginning to understand what had truly happened. The judge was an older woman, silver-haired, her voice calm and steady. She read the verdict with unwavering clarity. Richard Collins, my father, 7 years in prison for unlawful confinement, child abuse, and obstruction of justice. Frank and Aaron Collins, my uncles, 5 years each for similar charges. The family attorney, disbarred and under investigation for aiding in criminal concealment. The Colorado Behavior Facility, permanently shut down and facing separate charges for operating without license and violating children's rights. When my father's name was spoken, he said nothing. He looked at me. No regret, no remorse, just emptiness. But this time, I didn't look away. I stared into the eyes of the man who once kept me like property. And I knew, even if the sentence didn't erase everything, it was the first step toward no longer being a victim. That afternoon, Jessie hugged me tightly as we returned home. The old house was no longer a prison. We had secured the right to keep it, since it was in our mother's name, and we began to change. The reflection room had its door removed, repainted yellow, with an armchair, a bookshelf, and a handwritten sign on the wall. The recovery room, a space where women can breathe. Caleb, my younger brother, never turned away. He helped us set up security systems, upload every piece of evidence to the cloud, and share it with the media and human rights groups. My mother applied for a job as a counselor on a child protection hotline. As for me, I received a full-ride scholarship to study law from a non-profit organization, along with an offer. When you're ready, come back. Help protect kids like you once were. But justice, I've learned, isn't a destination. It's only one part of healing. The verdict didn't erase the nights I shivered from hunger, didn't undo the punishments for choosing rice over raw lettuce, didn't return the childhood I lost trying to be thin enough to be loved. But it did something else. It confirmed what we always knew deep down. We were right to speak out, and they were wrong to use power to keep us silent. And as my mother said the night after the sentencing, "Day on. You don't need permission to exist." 2 years after the trial, I returned to the room where I was once locked away. Not to cry, not to relive the pain, but to place one final item on the bookshelf. My first published book, Silence is Never an Option. That room is now a tiny library. Sunlight pours through a new window, landing softly on the wool rug where Jessie lies reading. My mom sits at the desk, preparing for the weekly meeting of the Quiet Thread. No more whispering about how to beat the scale. Now, they gather to learn how to love their bodies, to stand up for other children, and most importantly, to live without asking permission. I still keep the old scale. Not to use, but to remember. It sits in the garage, covered in dust, next to a wooden sign my mom hand-lettered. Measure your worth in kindness, not in pounds. People often ask me, after everything, what did you learn? I've thought about that person. It's prevention, it's education, it's dismantling the systems that once kept people silent. I learned that you are not a bad kid for asking questions. I learned that family isn't a place where you're afraid to walk into the kitchen, or where you hold your breath before stepping on a scale. Family, real family, is where you eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, cry when you're hurting, and say no, and still be loved. Now, every time I get a message from a girl I've never met, sometimes from Montana, sometimes from Florida or Idaho, I think of that 16-year-old girl who once trembled in the dark just because she ate half a sandwich. And I always write back, "You're not broken. You're not crazy. You're living in a broken system, but you're not alone. And you don't have to stay silent." We still meet every Thursday, in libraries, empty church halls, community centers, anywhere there's a spare chair and a little light. And every time someone finishes telling their story, everyone claps, not to cheer, but to say, "I heard you. You're not alone anymore." And That's why I've told this story. Not to reopen wounds, but so that someone, somewhere, might know this. You don't have to destroy yourself to hold on to a rotting family. You're not weak for stepping out of the darkness, and you're not selfish for choosing freedom.